Welcome, fans of Star Trek, to the Captain's Yacht, a production of the newly minted Teachers Talking Trek. Join us as we tour Star Trek's The Next Generation episode by episode. We need all hands on deck as we debate what works about these episodes 30 years later and what hasn't aged so well, awarding and revoking pips as befits each episode. We'll be asking our audience and listeners to rework, rethink, and reimagine various aspects of these episodes. This TrekWork can be submitted to the comments below. Special commendations for those who participate. We are glad to have you here for episode 11 of our study of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 1. And today we'll be talking about Symbiosis, Skin of Evil, and We'll Always Have Paris. I am at Scholar Beta on all things social media, and I am joined here with my co-host, Captain Kanaka. Welcome, my friend.
Hello, hello. Glad to be here. Ready to roll.
All right, my friend. Why don't you talk about, give us a little recap, and then we'll launch into Symbiosis after we set that stage.
Awesome. So just a reminder for those of you who are new or longtime listeners, we have retweaked the formula. Now, Scholar Beta and I are going through these. We got about 5 to 10 minutes talking about what's good and what's bad. In between what's good and bad, the other person's going to have their own critique of that person's opinion or perspective on that. Then we award pips, and this is how it works. Pips are very much like stars. No pips corresponds on our rating as a red shirt crewman, going all the way up, pips and a half, all the way to admiral. And we have been talking, Scholar Beta, behind the camera that we probably won't be given any 5 pips until at least season 3, and I think that's definitely in order there.
Yeah, haven't run into any of those yet. Maybe Q-Who can say? Might get close, season 2, but yeah, it's going to take some time to get there, my friends. You'll have to hang out with us as we take that voyage.
Definitely. So we do have a commendation for original thinking. This is actually in reference to your TrekWork from Arsenal of Freedom, Scholar Beta. Twitter user at Mr. Picard comments on your TrekWork. No one ever notices or remembers the fact that Jean-Luc bought an entire planetary defense system. Thank you for doing so. I'd say he probably set it up so there are a few trapdoors for Loxana Troy to fall through should she be on board and try to decide to find him.
Nice.
That just day by day, hearing that was spectacular. So thank you, Twitter user Mr. Picard. You definitely made our day. So definitely a commendation for original thinking there. With that in mind,
nice job, Mr. Picard.
Definitely. Are we ready to go into Symbiosis?
I think so. Our first stop on this voyage. We're getting close to the end. So here we are with episode 22. Symbiosis, and we have an unknown star date here. This is off the charts. We're not sure what this is. That's exciting. So let's launch into it. What's going on here? Premise for Symbiosis: the Enterprise D rescues a listless freighter crew. That's the best word I could think of to describe their their emotion at the beginning, or attempts to, beaming on board cargo that one civilization has been using to exploit another for hundreds of years. Does Picard intervene, or will he lecture us about the Prime Directive? Dun, dun, dun. So I'm thinking this is a straight-up science mystery, and the big tropes that I'm seeing, we've got a super narcotic and the Prime Directive. I think it's its own trope. It kind of actually even defines its own type of episode, I think. So let's get into it, my friend. Tell us a little bit about how this episode came to be behind the scenes. Does it have a storied production history?
It kind of does, actually. A couple things here. I called dibs on this episode during our production meeting this week because I had a theory for this episode based on the landscape of late 1980s television shows. It didn't pan out, but it's definitely worth mentioning. I was expecting this episode to have some connection with First Lady Nancy Reagan's Just Say No War on Drugs campaign with Hollywood. So what she ended up doing, her big cause was, and this is kind of hysterical, she reached out to Hollywood writers and basically wrote in sort of morality plays dealing with drugs and the youth. And she pulled a lot of strings, given the fact that her husband, Ronald Reagan, was a former screen actor. There is a cartoon from the late 80s. I'm curious if you know about it, Scholar Beta, called Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue.
No,
are you familiar
never
with
heard
that?
of it.
Okay. Every cartoon character ever drawn, and I do mean every cartoon character, does a song and dance number to show that drugs are bad. You got everybody from Popeye the Sailor Man to Mickey Mouse to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Michelangelo apparently gives a kid tough love. It's kind of hysterical. I was expecting a connection there. No connection. That's kind of a bust, kind of a dud, but that theme will carry on into today's TrekWork. Instead, this episode is a lot of lasts, not firsts anymore. Lasts. This is the last film. This is the last filming episode with Denise Crosby as a full cast member. You can actually see her waving goodbye at the camera in the last cargo bay scene. If you look really close, the doors close behind her, behind Picard and Dr. Crusher. And during that time, you can see Denise Crosby stepping into frame and waving. Merrick Butrick, who played Dr. David Marcus, this is his last scene in a Star Trek project before dying of AIDS in 1989. Yep, Dr. David Marcus, Kirk's son in Wrath of Khan. Another Wrath of Khan reference, co-guest star Judson Scott, a.k.a. Joaquin from Wrath of Khan, is in this episode too. He'll come back, though, in the Voyager episode Message in a Bottle. So that's what I got there. With that in mind, I'm going to start getting into what I think is good about this real quick. I'm going to set the timer. There's not much, but there we go.
Okay.
What I think is good about this. It is a noble effort. This episode plays to my weakness, and that's the only reason why it gets any kind of love at all, because as a story, it's kind of crazy. It's a noble effort to show that drugs are bad. It has a terrible execution. I have a weakness for topical Trek episodes of Star Trek that make a conscious effort to discuss something from the time period that definitively makes those kinds of episodes historical documents. I like that. Felicium, another weakness that I have is sci-fi words that hide their meaning in ancient languages. Felicium, Felice, from Latin meaning happy, so it's basically the happy element, the happy drug. Cool species feature with the electrochemical shock.
Yep.
I think that's a cool twist. There is a plot twist that should work in theory. A lot of reasons why it doesn't. And at first you think the Felicium is a vaccine. Then you determine that it's their stash of drugs. This should work. Maybe it's because of the reputation of this episode or the fact that it's the stoned actors don't sell it very well. The plot twist should work. It should be compelling. There's a few things that hamper that. And I'm reaching here a little bit, but I think there's a connection between this and drug cartels. Case in point, the Felicium was outsourced to another agrarian planet for production due to a plague. During World War II, poppy was grown in the Sinaloa, Mexico area to make morphine. Neither side stopped, and drugs became a major part of both sides' economies. And in the case of Sinaloa, that's how you get the Sinaloa drug cartel. So that was my catch on that. I thought it was kind of interesting. What's your perspective on that, Scholar Beta?
You know, the couple things that you said stand out to me. You know, yeah, I too am a sucker for for the topical episodes. There just to me seems like this. You know, you said you maybe not see Nancy Reagan's influence in here. To me, I kind of do, especially with, and I'll talk about it a little bit, but Wesley talking with Data and Tasha about using drugs, and Wesley just not understand. I just don't get why anyone would ever do that. Well, what if the communities they lived in were flooded with this stuff by the CIA? There are other parts of this, of the war on drugs that are worth investigating, and I just feel like we picked the worst one, to be perfectly honest. So, the cartel thing, I think that would be also interesting to see, the kind of the ramifications of a civilization who's developed and has one product and might fight to the death to keep that product being relevant, and so they can continue to make income. So I don't know. I think you're right. I think it's an effort. They made some type of effort. It's just not a very good one. And they didn't explore very interesting facets of this. So yeah, I generally agree with you on what works there. What about what's not going on? What's not working so much? What do you think?
So with that in mind, what doesn't work here, there is the biggest thing that doesn't work for me at the beginning is that there's a jarring shift in acting and tone from the teaser to after the credits. I don't know if you noticed that, but it seems like they're desperate right before the credits, and then afterwards it plays out like a really bad Cheech and Chong episode or story or skit. The drugged up acting goes from funny to tedious in less than 5 minutes. I'm completely in full agreement with Yar and Riker when they get testy with the crew members, because it does become tedious. At first it's kind of silly, and then it gets old real fast. So kind of an interesting / laughable plot twist when people beamed the drug over instead of the people at the beginning, at that beginning scene. Kind of reminds me of a stoner comedy twist when cops show up and the people try to hide the drugs, and they do kind of crazy things to get the drugs out of the way. And speaking to your point about Wesley talking about drugs and having to talk to Yar about drugs, that is right out of an after-school special. So scripted, so stilted, hysterical in that regard. And one of the things is I agree with you that there is a connection to Nancy Reagan's agenda. I was just going to see if there was a connection, a more demonstrable connection.
Yeah.
Where Nancy Reagan reached out and said, or her organization reached out and said, make it this and we'll give you federal funds. And that wasn't there. But I definitely agree with you that they were coinciding with the First Lady's agenda there. So with all that in mind, I am giving this episode one single pip. It's an ensign.
Nice.
It's a noble effort, war on drugs, badly acted, badly written, everything's on the nose, nothing's explored beyond the superficial. That's my take on this. So with that in mind, Scholar Beta, what is your take on this? How many pips do you award?
See, I'm going with Lieutenant Junior grade here. One full, one outlined. So let's talk about what I'm thinking works about this one and how I came up with, a little boost over yours. What's good? Okay. I think the whole concept of control of a society via narcotics is fascinating. And this idea is going to actually be explored a little further in Deep Space Nine, specifically around the Jem'Hadar and their forced addiction to Ketracel White. So to be honest, like we said, this is kind of like the seed of some effort on this idea. And I think the DS9 staff took the idea and just made it way more interesting and took it way further. Of course, again, we're talking like very serialized versus episodic. They can do a little bit more with this theme over time and investigate it numerous times, and it is investigated. Bashir can maybe come up with a solution. Maybe Cisco can talk him out of it and put, you know what I'm saying? There's all these, maybe he can get through that conditioning. Nope, the drug is stronger. So whatever it is, I just think that they do a really great job of exploring in Deep Space Nine. And so, hey, I'll give this episode a little bit, maybe laying the groundwork, a little bit of credit for laying the groundwork for that. What else do I'm thinking about this? When we think about narratives that are about drug use, we usually think of it's like man versus self, the addict versus himself or herself. But really, this is man versus man. So it's kind of an interesting spin on that conflict. And, you said it was kind of a stoner comedy element, but I thought that the desperation of the Brachians really came through in that scene where Riker goes to the transporter room, and instead of receiving a, drugged out crew, they just get the shipment, the cargo itself, just, emphasizing how important that is. I honestly kind of appreciated that scene and thought, hey, there's something interesting, or there's something really important about this cargo if they're willing to risk everything and beam it over. I already knew what the twist was, of course, but I like that a little bit. So what do you think about the whole, most of my positive ideas on this episode stem from the premise about the control of a society via narcotics. What do you think about that?
So I definitely give you props for pointing out the foundation that this episode lays in bigger and better storylines in Deep Space Nine. I didn't even think of that when I was watching it, but then again, Deep Space Nine is not my area of expertise. I'm more original series, next generation oriented. I definitely like that. The thing that I see your point as to, and I see the writer's point as to why they would beam the supply over first, because it's so important and it's desperate. Because of the slightly comical way in which the drug scenes were acted, that changes the tone for me. But I definitely agree with you that theoretically you're going this way, and you're showing that this substance is more valuable to them than their very lives. I think that's great, and I think if acted and directed better, that would have come across light years better than how it actually came across. Definitely. So go ahead.
So, yeah, my list, unfortunately, of things that are not so great is a little bit longer. So here we go. Okay, I am not a fan of the Prime Directive, and we're going to get into this, I guess, as we move through this series, but this is why I would not be, or rather, this is why I would be a really bad Starfleet captain. I've got empathy, my friends, and I want to constantly be helping the other civilizations that I'm exploring in my Galaxy-class starship. What's interesting about the Prime Directive for me is that TNG episodes that revolve around the Prime Directive usually revolve around breaking it or getting around it in a clever way. So to me, this reveals that there's the general order number 0 or number 1, whatever you want to call the Prime Directive, is just a little out of date if we're constantly trying to circumnavigate it and get around it and playfully interpret it. Sometimes Picard, he usually does the right thing, I would say. This is one of the few episodes where I disagree with how he handles it. But, strict adherence to the Prime Directive just reeks of constitutional originalism, which I think is among the silliest ways to interpret the Constitution. Here we are in 2020 modern America with the technology that we have and the type of, society that we have, and we're interpreting the laws of it via a document that's, 300 pushing 300 plus years. To me, that is just, it's kind of silly. I don't like it. And so, like, strict adherence to the Prime Directive, characters who are obsessed with it, who make it their reason for being, just annoy me, to be honest. So let's talk about the ending of the episode where the Prime Directive comes directly in. Where we leave off, the Breckians are going to get this supply of drugs. They're going to beam down to their planet with it, but they aren't going to get their freighters repaired, meaning that when this supply runs out, right, the Anarians, unless the Anarians are generous, the Breckians are going to go through a terrible withdrawal and suffering, that Crusher outlines multiple times. And Crusher could synthesize a compound to reduce that suffering, but Picard rejects it straight up. And instead, the Breckians will suffer, and this suffering could lead to change, or the Anarians could maintain the status quo by other means. To me, it's kind of a feel-bad ending. Nobody wins, really. The drug addicts get their drugs. Picard lectures Crusher in the turbolift, and it's kind of awkward. And I am sympathizing way more with Beverly than I am with Jean-Luc here. And so, it's kind of a muddy, bad look for the Prime Directive, in my opinion. All right, last thing, and then I'll kick it over to you. I'm sure you got some things to say to the Prime Directive. But last thing on this, the Wesley talking with Data Tasha about the morality of drug use. Just want to say one more thing. One more thing on this. It just feels pandering and heavy-handed. There are some people, that, do drugs and then get addicted to them, and it's a really bad thing. But there's also, opioid addicts, right? And we know they didn't just go to the corner and buy some drugs and then get addicted. There's also people facing poverty, like Tasha describes, but we're not empathizing with that, or, we don't empathize with people who are facing poverty in this fully automated luxury communist ship that we're flying on. We have no sympathy for them. We just turn our nose up. I don't know. To me, it just this problem, America has a horrible relationship with drugs and mind-altering substances in general. And I feel like this country worships some, a.k.a. alcohol, and then criminalizes other, a.k.a. all the other drugs that are criminalized. And it's just really confusing and messy, and an episode really could investigate why some are preferred and accepted and allowed and not others. But no, all drugs are bad. Wesley can't understand it. And in a show about learning and understanding, we're just going to shrug our shoulders and be like, well, I guess I don't get it, Mom. It just seems weak to me.
Definitely.
So I'm gonna pass it back to you, my friend. What do you think? That whole Prime Directive stuff, or the drug thematic stuff? Any other things we need to say about this or on your mind?
So the way they handle the Prime Directive and enforce the Prime Directive is why I don't give this anything more than an ensign, because I was hoping for something more clever. There are clever ways to sidestep the Prime Directive. See Pen Pals, the season 2 episode where they do that.
Yes.
They exercise some creativity. I was hoping for something like that, and it didn't happen. And you're right, it does leave you with this extremely lackluster, completely torpedoes the message at the bottom. I tend to lean into the Prime Directive more than you do, probably because of my family's background. Growing up in a Hawaiian household, I've been lectured. I even gave a lecture on this week when we covered the annexation of Hawaii in my class, where cultural contamination happens and cultures that are completely and irrevocably changed as a result of contact. For that reason and that reason alone, for example, Hawaiian language and even the hula was outlawed because of contact between Western explorers and Native Hawaiian Kanaka. So I can understand why, given that precedent, the Prime Directive would exist. But it's not applied well in this episode. Certainly not. So that's my take on that. Are we ready?
I agree. Yeah, maybe here's something, audience. If you're interested in the Prime Directive showdown, Kanaka versus Beta, I can see that being a great episode, my friend.
Definitely.
That'd be fun.
Let us know. We're always open to new things. I'd love to have some discussion with you on that. With that in mind, are we ready for TrekWork?
I think it's time to assign these fair listeners who've done a great job and received some commendations already. I think it's the time to give them some more work.
Awesome. So with that said, your Trek work for this episode is to draft a Star Trek public service announcement using a character of your choice on a topic of your choice. Here is mine.
Okay.
I was expecting something like this or some sort of connection to this in the episode or some sort of blatant, and we kind of got that with the Wesley and Yar scenario. But basically, as you can see here with the modeled meme, take a character, give that character a public service message, and send it out on the internet. I know that the Star Trek Memes Facebook group is looking for new memes. Let's start this one. Star Trek PSA, hashtag Trek PSA. So that's my Trek work for this episode. I had a lot of fun making that one. With that in mind,
very cool.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw in one more thing here, to close this episode out before we get to Skin of Evil, Skin of Awful, or whatever you want to call that episode. I just want to I have a hyper specific Enterprise interior today, and something I didn't even pay attention to until this viewing, and that would be the aft bridge stations, specifically the hideable chairs in the aft bridge stations. You know what I'm saying? Those little chairs that can slide right into the cubbies and disappear, and you can't even tell, or you could slide them out and sit and have a nice computing session by engineering or navigation or whatever the other aft stations are. They change from early seasons to later seasons, but they're very important computer stations, and you got to have some comfy chairs. And I didn't even realize that these existed until watching really carefully this go-around. So there it is, my friend. Our Enterprise interior for the week.
Thank you for bringing that up, and I feel bad that I forgot about that. That broke my brain so many times, realizing, oh my gosh, it is so seamless. And then you push a button and the chair comes out. I need something like that. My wife and I both work at home. I'd love to have something like that. That would be awesome. Now,
I love it.
Are we ready to go to, as you call it, Skin of Awful?
I am, my friend. I am. And, I call it Skin of Awful. And to be honest, in this watch, it wasn't nearly as bad as I remember, but it's still really terrible. But it's not nearly as bad. There is one part of it that is just mind-boggling bad. So we'll get into that in just a second. But here we are, episode 23, Skin of Evil, stardate 41601.3. While traveling back from a conference, Counselor Troy's shuttle crash lands on a seemingly empty planet. Yet this planet, Vagra 2, is home to one of the most vile, most terrible, most evil beings in the universe, Armus. So, genre, I didn't even know when I was trying to classify this type of episode. It's a thriller, kind of. It's dramatic, kind of. It's got action, kind of. So I'm going to call it thriller, drama, action. I really don't know. This episode, I really am curious what you know about the behind the scenes, because it feels all sorts of cobbled together. And the tropes, I actually thought about the tropes too and scratched my head. And I'm going to go with distress signal, and I'm going to go with big bad evil guy. Also there's like a fond farewell trope too. Funeral for a colleague trope kind of thing going on for a cast member. I mean, not a
Yep.
colleague. That'd be really sad. But there's a lot of kind of things here and there. But really, this is about Armus versus the Enterprise crew. So I'm going to go with the big bad evil guy in the distress signal. So tell us a little bit what's going on behind the scenes with this one. How did this come to be?
So the original title of this episode was originally called The Shroud. Riker was supposed to have a residual stain on his face after being absorbed by Armus, showing, quote, the sign of the shroud. Um,
Ugh,
yeah,
terrible.
yeah, yeah. So fortunately, that didn't happen. For the broader scope of things, Crosby wanted out of her TNG contract, and longtime listeners of the show might remember that we called this back with the episode Haven, where Yar
Yeah.
literally has one line, because up until that point, she is the best developed character out of all of them. You got episodes like Code of Honor, for better or worse. That's Yar focused, Yar centric,
Yep.
and to a certain degree, The Naked Now, and all these episodes that build her up and develop her. Then she kind of stalls and gets put in a holding pattern. Crosby wanted out of her contract, so she discussed with Roddenberry what the best way would be to write her out of the show. And Roddenberry decided to kill Tasha Yar off. He said it would be more dramatic and more final to do that than to have a transfer or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's what happened there. But then Gene Roddenberry's lawyer, Leonard Majlish, he got involved.
This guy again. Haven't heard of him in a minute,
Yeah, we haven't. So in case you need a refresher on who this gentleman is, Leonard Majlish was Gene Roddenberry's personal lawyer. He went in and basically negotiated with Paramount to get a massive compensation package for Star Trek The Next Generation even to be made. He was also accused of systematically going through and micromanaging the writers and giving the writers notes he claimed were from Gene Roddenberry, but were really from him. Yeah, and Maislish was later banned from the Paramount lot after after the writers of the show filed a grievance with the Writers Guild of America. This is right before the strike happened, by the way.
Let's go, Writers Guild. Ban that fool. Yeah.
Yep. So a lot of people who are in the know on this episode say that the way in which Yar died was Maislish's idea. So they blame Maislish
Or his non-idea.
Yeah, there you go. Good call there. So a couple other bits of trivia here. Armis's pit was Metamucil and Printer's Ink.
Yep, I remember that.
Yep.
Poor Jonathan Frakes having to swim that.
That's the deal there. Frakes actually was absorbed by the pit and ejected. After that scene was shot, LeVar Burton joked about it and said, Frakes, I would never do that again, or I'd never do that, period. And then when the funeral scene was filmed, the main cast entered the set with black armbands on, and Crosby wore a shroud. So that's what I got there. With all that in mind, I give this to you, Scholar Beta. What is good, if anything, about Skin of Evil?
Well, there's some, sheddings of interesting ideas here. See what I did there? Okay, first thing that's kind of cool about this episode, like I said, kind of. How Armus got on, what did I say this planet was called? Vega 2? Varga 2 or something like that? Yeah. How Armus got there is pretty freaking cool. Okay, so basically, if we're taking what Armus says, literally, or what Armus and Troy kind of work out together, they're this race of titans. I'm not sure if they're literally titans, like Greek mythology, like exists in the original series, or a different type of titan, whatever it is. These people somehow purified themselves, and they became so pure that they are literally able to shed their evil, spite, and malice and leave it behind in a pool of Metamucil and Printer's Ink, and then move on with their journey. And I think that's actually kind of cool. That's seemingly very interesting. Do you remember that episode Transfigurations where that dude turns into an orange? He wears the blue suit and turns into a bright orange guy. It's kind of like, what does he leave behind when he metamorphs into a really super cool being? Maybe something evil and terrible. And I think that idea is interesting. Second thing that I think is kind of cool, I honestly think Troy really rules in this episode. I think Marina Sirtis' acting works pretty well in that crash shuttlecraft. She's bringing fear, claustrophobia, sadness. She tussles with Armis, kind of unafraid, and she's all business. At one point, she tells Picard that the creature needs to be destroyed because he's, sadism and cruelty with no redeeming qualities. I love that. Actually, maybe Data says that. Now I can't interpret my notes. I'm not sure who says that, but I love that description of Armis. Here's a little mini debate I want to have with you right here on the spot.
Okay.
So Guinan says much later in the episode that's a billion times better than this, Yesterday's Enterprise. She says that Tasha's death was senseless, meaningless. It's without purpose. So I want to talk to you. Do you think it's without purpose? Because the way I read it, she died trying to rescue Troy, right? So she, the Enterprise, had no way of understanding the power of Armis. She was sent there. She's the security chief. Her job is to rescue Troy. She goes and does that. She's killed while doing that. Now, I know Armis kind of senselessly kills her, and he kind of talks about how it's without meaning, or he didn't care. He just wanted to do it. But does that make her death necessarily senseless? I don't know. What do you think, my friend?
Actually, I kind of think it does, and I agree with Guinan on this because they basically give Yard the red shirt treatment.
So that type of senseless, not in like the reason she dies, but because she dies like a red shirt?
Right, that's the impression that I get, and I kind of agree with a lot of critics on this episode for that. They basically give her the red shirt treatment. In my mind, this is no different than that episode Friday's Child in the original series where a red shirt is with Captain Kirk, and then they visit the indigenous people on the planet. Then a Klingon shows up, and the red shirt goes, "Captain, a Klingon," and then one of the indigenous people throw a spear, and it hits the red shirt in the chest. I love how deeply you read into this, and my opinion is slowly changing now that I give it a second look and a third look and a 50th look. In terms of consistent with her character, that does have some meaning there. I mean, it could have been worse. She could have been blown up in a space battle. That would have been even more meaningless. But from my perspective...
Can I just say one more thing about that, though, my friend? I just also think, okay, so red shirts, they die. The reason why red shirt deaths, in my opinion, aren't meaningful is because you don't know who they are. This is just rando person number 635 and never seen before and is now dead, so I don't care. But, I don't think the suddenness of death necessarily makes it any more meaningful. I'm thinking about my old show that used to be good until it became awful, Game of Thrones. And, they suddenly killed off a bunch of people. The TV show even more so than the book. And, I think sudden can be really dramatic and keep you on your toes. Now, this is kind of more of living in the rules of a sitcom where people don't suddenly die. This show, the serialized show. So, I understand that. So I understand why, just watching it kind of makes you seem and look more like a red shirt. But, the more I watch it, the more I think about what Guinan's saying, I still love Yesterday's Enterprise and I love Guinan, but I don't know if purposeless meaninglessness is exactly how I would describe it. So with that in mind, what do I go to? Did I talk about, I talked about some of the good. We had a little back and forth on that. Should I get into what's terrible about this?
I have a real quick
You want to say one more thing? Yeah. What do you got?
Question. There's a fan theory out there that Armis is really a changeling. Given that you're a Deep Space Nine aficionado, so the Titans that he's describing are not the founders.
Okay, do you remember that episode of the original series where they meet, what Greek god did they meet? Mercury? Apollo?
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
All right.
To me, there's I literally believe Titan from the Universal Translator is more accurate than Founder. That's just my opinion.
Okay. I was curious what your thoughts were on that, given your affinity for Deep Space Nine, and I think it holds merit, but your perspective on Apollo and who mourns Adonis, I think that has a connection there too. So lay it on me, Scholar Beta. What's bad about this episode?
Oh my gosh. The look of Armis. What in the world am I looking at? What? This is the best you could do. You're going to make a big bad guy, an evil dude who's going to kill one of your main cast, and you're going to make it look like a dude in a trash bag covered in oil. What in the heck are you thinking? There are so many. I actually kind of went through and clicked through my notes to look at all the screen caps I took, and there are so many interesting aliens that come up in season 1. that are way cooler and more menacing and interesting. Even the electricity from Lonely Among Us, to me, is more interesting and menacing than sludge pit, oiled covered Metamucil printer ink Armus. I just think the look of Armus is so disgusting and so awful and so weak. You know, when like he's rising slowly, they do it like 4 times because they don't have anything to do in this episode, so they have to reuse the same shot over and over again. And you get those reaction shots from the Enterprise crew, the away team, and this, like, there's no emotion. Like, they don't even know what they're looking at. What am I looking at? Am I looking at a man in a trash bag? What am I looking at here? It just is so bad. Armus looked worse than I remember him. I'm not watching this on Blu-ray or anything like that either. I'm watching this in 480p DVD, and it just looks terrible, and I can't even imagine how bad it would look in Blu-ray. I didn't even go look it up on TrekWork. That's how disturbed I was by this. Am I supposed to be afraid of this creature? I mean, it killed Yar, so that's kind of intimidating, but am I really supposed to be afraid of this piece of whatever this is? I don't know, man. I just think it is so lazy. I was trying to think, what is lazier than Armus? And I got nothing. I couldn't come up with a single alien that I think is even lazier than this. You know, even like some random humanoid with a random little ridge on their forehead is more interesting than Armus. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I just think it's hideously lazy and bad. Yeah, what do you think? You got one that's worse? I'm up for this. What do you got?
The Baku from Star Trek Insurrection.
Oh, the Baku are pretty gross. You're right about that. The stretchy skin guys? Or no, the humanoids. The humanoids.
The humanoids. They didn't even try there. They did not even try. And they had... You could have tried to make them more attractive, but you didn't even try there. So that, in terms of laziness, I would say the Baku.
Just for the sake of my time, I'm going to agree to disagree with you on that, because at least the Baku aren't like, they didn't try to go for something alien. Anyways, but you're right about that. That's some lazy nonsense right there. You definitely got number 2 or number 3 in my book for sure. Okay, last thing that I think doesn't work about this, and I'm curious I'll give you the pips and I'll kick it over to you. So I'm on the fence about the funeral scene. You know, the funeral. Okay, on the one hand, okay, I'll give it some points. It does, you know, it's kind of touching. I like Tasha Yar's words about Picard, heart of an explorer, soul of a poet. That's kind of what I strive for in life. You know, I like that description a lot. I think that's really apropos. But on the other side, you know, you can't, if you're a Star Trek person, you think a lot about technology in this world. You know, obviously you do, obviously I do. So so many questions come up when I see this. I'm like, when does Jean-Luc have a holographic will? Does he update it regularly? Does Riker? Does Troy? Does Beverly? When would you do that? Do you do it once a year, once a month, once a week? You know, what if it was awkward and out of date? You know, what if it was awkward and really revealing and talked about your one-night stand with Data and you really didn't want anyone to know about that, but Jean-Luc Picard just downloaded off of your personal log and put it out there for everyone to see? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just more questions than answers there. So really what ticks me off about this episode, really just the gross, disgusting look of Armus and the kind of the strange questions that come up with the funeral. Well, honestly, that's really the only thing that bothers me about it. And so for that, I'm going to give this thing an ensign. I'm giving it 1 pip. You know, it is Armus is offensively bad, but honestly, besides that, I don't think it doesn't fall below the rank of ensign for me. What about you, my friend? What are you hitting this with?
So here is my deal. I applaud your generosity here because I don't have a lot for it right here in this episode. I'm giving it a chief. I'm giving it half a pip.
Nice.
Chief Petty Officer there. So there are a couple things here that work. There are 3 things that work for me. There is a spectacular scene with Yar and Worf at the beginning. I've always wondered what a relationship between these two would look like, and this is the closest thing we'll ever see of it. Everybody talks about Yar's relationship with Data. I think that was forced. I think that the entire reason that storyline existed in Naked Now is to demonstrate that Data has a hard drive. But
whoa, good one.
There you go. But
a thumbstick. Oh, sorry, that might be a little explicit. Sorry, audience. We're moving on.
But in terms of personality, in terms of how these two characters would complement each other, Worf and Yar would work a lot better as a pairing instead of Yar and Data. They talk for less than a minute about martial arts, and it's great. Good close up on Worf after hearing that Yar was killed. Pretty good deal there. The scenes where you like Troy and Armis, I like Picard and Armis in this episode. I think the scenes in which he confronts Armis are pretty good. And I like the funeral scene. With me, it's consistent with Yar's character that she would write something like this, given her position. And she says at the beginning of the episode, or rather the beginning of the video, that if you're watching this, I'm dead. And considering her rough upbringing, her understanding of the fragility of life, I'm okay with it. I definitely hear you on the logistics of maintaining something like that, and the discretion with which a commanding officer like Picard would do. I don't think it's standard procedure. And to the best of my knowledge, we don't see anything like this again. Data certainly didn't do something like this in Nemesis, or we don't see anything like that again. So I bought the funeral scene because it's consistent with Yar's character, especially considering she's grown with her empathy and love, which she attributes to Troy. Her send-off for family and the fact that she does not have family, and how the Enterprise became her family. In Hawaiian culture, there's something called Hanai Ohana, where they're not your actual family, but because of common interest, you adopt them as if they were your family. And I bought that. And they talk about really insightful characterization. Riker encouraging Yar. I already talked about Troy's empathy, love, and instilling Yar with a sense of femininity. Worf's warrior spirit, Crusher's determination, Wesley's kindness, Geordi's optimism. All of this is spot on. I do like that. There are literally 3 things from my perspective that's good about Skin of Evil, and there they are. What are your thoughts on that, Scholar Beta?
You know, I too like the martial arts tournament talk. I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you did. And yeah, the tease of a relationship potentially, or some feelings between these two. I noted that, but then I thought, wow, it's kind of a strange time to bring that up on your death episode. Yep. You know, like, that's weird. So it was kind of neutral for me. On the one hand, it's interesting, something to think about. On the other hand, it's kind of just brought up and then you're dead. Okay, yep. On the adopted crew member, I'm with you there too. Yeah, I definitely think so. But I see that she's kind of adopted this family. So you're thinking this is something that maybe just Yar has done. Picard maybe hasn't created this will. Okay, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah, that Worf kind of feels that sense of adoption as well. There's a couple characters that are actually going to go through that. In fact, maybe they developed that with Worf because they already had some of these ideas for Yar, and they just could recycle them through his character too, you know? So anyways, I like your ideas there.
Because we never see it again.
Very cool, my friend.
Thank you. We never see it again. We don't see any other character. Nope. To my knowledge, Jadzia doesn't do anything like this in DS9. So
though they do definitely have episodes about her death, and you know, them having to go on like a Klingon road trip in order to celebrate her death. I remember that one. That's pretty good too.
I'm not that far into DS9 yet. I've been putting it off for several years. So real quick, here is what doesn't work for me, and you already touched on some of these. There's another chief engineer, Lynch. Okay, that's right. Consistency, what's that? There are too many needless contrivances. The Enterprise engines are shut down at the beginning. No payoff. They throw caution to the wind and start up without testing the core. To show urgency, I guess, but there's no real payoff there. They can't beam up the wreck because the episode has to happen. Data can tell what it's not, but not what it is, what Armis is. Insufficient information. Yeah. A lot of contrivance there. It's just to kill Yar. Yes, sir.
You know, there's a lot of that going on in Symbiosis too. Remember the whole, like, the star is all crazy and it's causing interference and static and then goes nowhere. Similar idea. Yeah, we have this kind of contrived setup just to get to the episode, you know?
Yep. And Star Trek is famous for that, and that's definitely something that docks it for pips, unless there's a good reason for it. The Armis character, bad visual effects, as you pointed out. Also, really bad voice acting, especially the bad villain at the end. I write here, it sounds like a playground bully instead of a sinister killer. This guy sounds like he's going to take your milk money instead of, you know, more of a Hannibal Lecter type, the cool, calculating, killing people but getting nothing from it, sociopathic stuff. Also,
Oh yeah.
I attribute it to a Power Ranger villain. The way it
Yeah.
sounds, the way it looks, definitely a Power Ranger villain.
But that's insulting to Power Rangers, to be honest, my friend.
Okay. I'm willing to dunk
I
on
just like to
Power
point out
Rangers.
they had real costumes. Those aliens had real costumes. This is a nothing. But keep going.
So, with that in mind, Armus does the terribly written bad guy's cardinal sin of letting Picard talk to Troy to figure out how to beat Armus. Cardinal
Yeah.
sin, no excuse for that. Just has to happen. So those are my deals. That's why this gets to be a chief. This doesn't even get a full officer's commission, half a pip, and we move on. With that in mind, are we ready for TrekWork, Scholar Beta?
I think so.
All right. So,
Shall I read it?
Yeah,
Or do you
you
got it?
lead off. No, you lead off on this. Yours is better thought out than mine.
So here's what I'm asking, my friends. This week, give us some thoughts on how would you exit Tasha Yar from the show? And I said exit. You don't necessarily have to kill her. Would you go the Gene Roddenberry route and kill her? Would you go for something else, like a transfer or some space anomaly? Would you leave some room for her to come back? So I want you to write a brief synopsis on how Yar leaves TNG and add some production notes about possible future cameos. Throw those in the comments, tweet it at us. Special commendations for those who participate. We'll read your awesome answers and your handle at the beginning of our show. And really quickly, this is just kind of tongue-in-cheek because there are truly no Enterprise interiors in there. There's sick bay, there's the bridge. We've covered those ad nauseum. You know, I'm even picking out special chair locations now. So I'm going to go back to Type 7 shuttlecraft, cargo section, and cockpit damaged. So now we get to see what this Type 7 shuttlecraft looks like damaged. We got to see what it looked like while operational. A couple episodes back, now we're going to see it damaged. There's Troy back there in the cargo section. Things are all strewn about, and there's Picard up there when he beams over to hang out with Troy, committing, bad guy sin number 1. So there's a Type 7 shuttlecraft interior, a little more detail on it. Just happens to be damaged detail.
Awesome. Are we ready for We'll Always Have Paris?
Yes.
All right. So with that said, getting into We'll Always Have Paris. Make it so. What's our story and tropes here?
All right. We'll Always Have Paris. Stardate 41697.9. En route to some much-needed shore relief, the Enterprise discovers a hiccup in time, leading Picard to investigate and discover not only the source of the time anomaly, but also an old flame who hasn't burned out after all this time. Oh, see what I did there? Genre. This is classic Trek, my friends. This is we're flying through space when I'm going to call this space mystery anomaly. Tropes, we have the old romance or the romance from the past. We have that fateful day, the one day where we chose to or to not go confront our love interest. We've got time travel and alternate realities in this. Lots of excellent stuff to talk about in this episode. To be perfectly honest, this may be one of the best of season 1. So let's get into it, my friend. What's going on behind the scenes? Is there some good development details about this? Some cool storylines that were dropped? What do you got?
There's a couple things to mention in terms of the broader production history of Star Trek: The Next Generation. This is the first script that was hampered by the writer's strike of 1988. This would completely shake up season 2. This would actually, I'm really looking forward to telling you all how each episode of season 2 came about, because there are massive seismic aftershocks of the writer's strike of 1988. It almost cancels TNG. It's interesting that it starts here with a couple episodes left to go, but that's how production works sometimes. After all, Yar's last scene in Star Trek happens in the episode before she actually dies, which it's interesting looking at it that way. The title is a clear homage to the 1942 film Casablanca, but it's not the only one. There's a reference to the Blue Parrot Cafe, which Picard mentions at the end of the episode, another reference. The original draft was supposed to emphasize Picard's romantic tendencies by having Picard do the wild thing getting romantic during commercial and heavily implying that. This was the original writer's intention. The men involved, especially Patrick Stewart, completely nixed this piece of direction, which is kind of interesting because when we bring up Captain's Holiday, I'm going to come back to this because this sort of thing is exactly later on in the show what Picard says was lacking, and he has an opportunity in this episode, and it doesn't happen. Maybe the way it was written, don't know. Also, Patrick Stewart's professional decorum was extremely rigid during this time of the show. Come season 3, completely different psyche there. So, with that in mind, I think I'm running point on this one. This is my favorite season 1 episode out of the bunch. As a kid, I loved this episode for its theories on time. I am a sucker for time travel. Ever since I saw Back to the Future as a kid, I've been fascinated by the concept of how you could build a time machine, how time machines would work, how time travel will work, time paradoxes, etc. And as an adolescent seeing this, I absolutely loved this episode for that reason. As an adult, I love this episode for a whole new set of reasons. Picard thinking back to his younger days and rationalizing his impulsive decisions back then make him all the more awesome now. The fact that he's willing to admit fear, leave somebody hanging, lost love, I definitely love that a lot. So with that in mind, Mannheim's theories of time are kind of trend-setting given the time period in which they were written. There's a connection to quantum interference and the multiverse postulated by Hugh Everett. This show, back in the era where Star Trek was interested in being scientifically plausible, makes an attempt to connect quantum mechanics with relativity, which are two things that cancel each other out, and they actually make a concerted effort to do that in a way that's semi-plausible. Good characterization with Picard, love interest, who isn't Beverly. Oh my gosh, who knew? Picard could be interested in other people. Picard represses deep personal issues. And the interesting ticking clock phenomenon, I'm interested in seeing the worst case scenario of time and causality collapsing. I kind of felt the same way about Avengers Endgame, saying what would happen if Thanos actually won in that scenario. I'm kind of interested in that. And in the case of We'll Always Have Paris, we kind of do see this in the later episode Parallels, in which causality and you have reality colliding with each other in different parts of the omniverse. That's another thing they postulate a little bit in terms of where Dr. Mannheim goes, which is the omniverse, which is not only the multiverse, but all other realities with different dimensional requirements. Also, it has some awesome sets and interiors. I like this. I like Dr. Mannheim's laboratory. I think that's pretty well done, especially considering, and this might have something to do with why Armus and Skin of Evil look so terrible. They had no budget at the end, zero. So the fact that they were able to pull that off, I like that a lot. What are your thoughts on that, Scholar Beta?
Yeah, me too. I am a sucker for time travel. Anything with time travel, immediately gets my attention. So this one definitely had me locked in from the very beginning. Yeah, thinking back, I also like the idea of Picard kind of revisiting his past and thinking about all the moves he's made and how it's led him to this point, and if he regrets those or not. We're going to see that a lot more in Tapestry. That idea is really kind of developed, and no regrets about the past and all that kind of stuff is developed there. So I really appreciate that too. Yeah, discussions, the multiverse, the omniverse, quantum mechanics, relativity, all that is really fascinating, and I appreciate them straddling both scientifically accepted phenomena and theory, and trying to reach out and think about other possible theoretical approaches to time and such. So I really love this episode for those reasons too. So all the things you like, spot on. I'm watching it and appreciating it through the exact same lens.
Awesome. Very quickly about what's bad for me. There are a few fluctuations in the details that are kind of plot holes. They play it both ways with the holodeck. When I first saw the episode back when I was a kid, I was like, oh my goodness, how could you, with empirical precision, recreate the details of an obscure day in an obscure time, right down to who was there? That's kind of amazing, but they kind of play fast and loose with that. The holodeck gets the weather wrong, but the people right. So that's kind of interesting. Also, just out of curiosity, there's an instrument that a musician is playing. It sounds like an accordion, but most decidedly not an accordion.
And it looks like a hamster should live in one of those tubes.
Exactly, and maybe it's like a t-shirt cannon, but for hamsters. You get a hamster, you get a hamster, you get a hamster.
Yes, that's what I was thinking exactly.
So I just wanted to bring that one up there. In the climax, the Data who drops antimatter uses contractions, which suggests he's not from the correct time continuum, even though he says he is. Also a cheap shot with the transporter snafu where Data and Riker materialize, and then several seconds elapse, suggesting that Worf died right after Yar did, and then he materializes. Kind of a cheap shot there. Mannheim has a dramatic change of heart, going from everything that's going to happen is going to be worth it to I must destroy my research in 3 minutes or less. Yeah, once he realizes everything's going to pot, I guess he can realize why things are bad, but kind of an interesting thing there. Two small things real quick. There is a bad line at the end of the climax in which Data says the hole is patched, but not sealed, to which Picard says patched is good enough. It is not. We are talking about a situation in which reality could be destroyed. Patched doesn't cut it. The one last thing, the biggest flaw is they bring up a subplot where Crusher is a little concerned about this old flame.
Oh, yeah.
And there's no resolution to it at all. Zero. That's the biggest flaw for me on that one. And with that in mind, I am giving this 3 pips, which is the rank of Commander. It's a great sci-fi concept balanced with a strong character study. Its only handicap, so to speak, or the things that keep it from being better are mild to moderate storytelling flaws. That's my perspective on that. What are yours, Scholar Beta?
I'm going to actually go with Commander as well. Nicely done. I think this is one of the best episodes of the season. And like you said, there's some minor story flaws, but I think it's, even though there were some writer's strike issues that you outlined earlier, I still think it is very tightly constructed, and the themes carry from A plot to B plot very nicely. It's doing everything a TNG episode, I'm sorry, a season 1 TNG episode wants to do or endeavors to do, in my opinion. So I'm going to give this thing, again, 3. And let's get into what I'm liking about it. So both of us think it's Commander. Here's what I'm drawn to. As I said, is this the best episode of season 1? We'll get into that with our recap maybe next episode. The only ones I can think of that possibly rival it are Data Lore and 11001001, but those are the only ones. And so there's a great A-plot in this. The mystery around the time anomaly, the Mannheim effect is excellent. The special effects used to show the non-linearity of time, do the experiments is amazing. Specifically, the scene with Picard, Data, and Riker on the turbolift, running into their old selves and then cutting to their old selves and following that perspective. That is sci-fi, hard mode. I love that. I just think that everything about that's awesome. You know, and then there's another great scene about the time anomaly where there's the 3 datas. I love that as well. That's the most number of datas we're going to see on a screen until a fistful of datas, you know? So that's awesome. You know, more data, the better, usually, in my opinion. But then you have this awesome B plot, too. Also about time, but thinking about it a little differently. 22 years ago, Picard ghosted a beautiful young woman because he was afraid of commitment and not knowing what he wanted and of love. I love that he is, like you said earlier, he's vulnerable. They discuss this. They get out what they're repressing, and they do it. Picard and Janice, is that her name I want to say? Yeah. Yep. Picard and Janice, at least, they do that in the observation lounge, which observing things about yourself, observing space, conducting negotiation. It's just like the perfect place. Yep. For that conversation to happen. I'm so glad that it didn't happen in Dr. Crusher's office, which I think is where it was like kind of set up in the scene before. The thematic connection. Time very well may be nonlinear, as Paul Mannheim is experiencing it in this episode, yet when humans step out of time, it brings them to their knees, so to speak, at least mentally. Therefore, Picard, and everyone except Data, you know, must accept for now the immutability of time and continue to move forward along its progression. And, you know, you can't get too caught up in the past. So that's kind of how I think of this episode, really doing a nice job of like, yeah, you can think about time in a different way. You could go on the holodeck. You could think about what you're missing out on. You could, you know, fret about the past. You could do experiments and try to break into the past and relive it or something like that. Or you can continue forward along it. You know, you can patch the hole and continue forward. And that's what I think actually happens in this episode. He kind of patches up a hole in his heart and he moves forward. So the patch thing works way better for Picard than it does for the actual experiments. Like you said, we'd probably want to not have time break, you know, itself. So I just think the connection A to B, thematic connections, everything is there for me in this episode. And so, yeah, I'm going with Commander. The only reason I don't think it goes Captain or higher, in my opinion, is that there just is, like you said, there isn't any like kind of payoff or real emotional thrust that comes from the Picard subplot. You know, we find out like Picard, yeah, he regrets it, but he's going to move forward. That's basically it. You know, that's so like, even though there's really tight writing between the A and B plots, I just think, you know, in terms of significance to the characters, I don't see too much there. So you know, what do you think, my friend?
I love the connections that you've made there and the fact that you have Picard's emotional past being patched and how, in that case, patched is sufficient. How deeply you read into things. It didn't even occur to me that confrontation with Janice and Picard happens in the observation deck.
Yeah.
That's a good catch. I didn't even think about that. And you're right, it would have been extremely awkward if they had that confrontation in Crusher's office, which was the previous scene. That's a really good catch there. I definitely agree with you that there is absolutely no resolution to the character. It ends with him having that dinner or lunch that he was supposed to have so many years ago. And yeah, nothing comes of that. Crusher doesn't come to terms with it. Nothing happens there. That's why we do this, because your literary perspective complements the historical one, because I didn't even think of that.
So let me just say one more thing about location too. You know, there's people say location and setting and kind of use them interchangeably, but there's a really big difference. And I can't think of the literary critic who said this, but this is not my original idea, is the point. And that is location is a place that you go to. You know, setting is a place plus conflict. And so I think the location is the observation lounge. And the setting is the observation lounge where Picard is usually sitting at the head of the table in charge of the meeting and is now brought into conflict because he's like wandering around. He's super awkward. He's leaning on the bulkheads. He's staring out the transparent aluminum. He's, you know, making circles, pacing. That's what I love. You know, location can bring so much, but you got to make it setting. You got to bring it into that world of setting, add that conflict, and then it really comes alive. Observation lounge, amazing setting. Okay, so things that don't work. I just got one thing, one really small thing, and that is, now maybe I read this wrong because you were saying some things earlier about Mannheim changing his mind. Maybe I just like blanked on this, but is it implied that Mannheim's gonna, or someone is gonna continue this experimentation? Do you read that? Or did they shut it down hard and it's done and over with?
I was under the impression that they shut it down. I might be reaching on this, but maybe the writers are taking this concept and that creates the quantum fissure that sets up parallels. Because
that's cool. That's cool.
That in my head canon, that's viable and that's a plausible theory.
Yeah, I thought maybe there was this implication that they're going to keep going, but regardless of that, the bigger thing is like, should civilians? Because he's not in Starfleet. Should civilians be able to do this? It's a crazy world out there where you can have Starfleet and you can have people empowered by Starfleet and all the tech they have. And you can just have civilians like Soong build something like Data, which no one in Starfleet can. And then Mannheim do something crazy like this too. So it seems like, you know, you might want to regulate technology on some scale, even if it is fully automated luxury, communism, socialism, whatever we are in this show. It's kind of crazy to me that there are civilians out here who have this kind of technology and can like break time. So that doesn't really even compare to, I guess Soong is creating like a whole species of people, but Mannheim, dang. Yeah, what do you think about that?
This technically doesn't count because it's beta canon, but if you play the video game Star Trek Armada, the Mannheim Institute becomes part of the Federation, and it's regulated there.
Yeah, as it probably should, I feel like. But yeah, interesting. Good. Yeah, I'll take the video game. I'll give them some credits for that.
Definitely. I know purists say it doesn't count, but there is some precedent for that. Are we ready for TrekWork?
Yeah, lay it on me, my friend. What's our TrekWork this week?
So here's the TrekWork for this episode. Supposing the Mannheim effect happened to you, what would you either tell your past tense self and you pick the past tense version of yourself, or what would you want a future version of yourself to tell you? So with that in mind, if the Mannheim effect ever happened to me, I would love to talk to either myself in high school or myself immediately after college, because both times were kind of bad. High school, got picked on a lot for my autistic spectrum stuff. So telling him it's going to get better, telling my past tense self it would get better. And also the version of me who graduates college that it's okay. You'll be able to get a job. You'll be able to teach. You'll be able to talk about Star Trek with a fellow Star Trek fan and release it every Tuesday. And a future tense self telling me when the day that I go back from the pandemic and how I could plan and adjust, that would be a nice little deal. I don't want, how to write the next Die Hard or whatever. I want to figure out when we're going back and how best to make that happen. So that's what I would do.
Nice. Okay, well, I'm just got a couple of things here for our fair audience before we leave. I got a matte painting finally. It's the recreation of the Café des Artistes from the holodeck. Look at that beautiful Parisian skyscape there. You got the Eiffel Tower, and then you got some museums of modern art, and it's the future. Yep. And then we also have an amazing Enterprise interior, and that is the Enterprise Gymnasium. Oh yeah, where Picard and Dean, I want to say is the other dude's name. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's Dean, where they do a little fencing practice. And I checked the script to make sure that wasn't the holodeck. It definitely is labeled as the gymnasium. So there it is, my friend. The gymnasium that Wesley talks about in episode 1. You finally get to see in episode 20. What is this? 2, 3, 4. 24. So nice. Finally comes up. So there it is. That's all I got for an interior today. What do you got, my friend? Anything else we got to do before we close?
I'm glad we got that payoff. I didn't realize that was the low gravity gymnasium. That's beautiful. I'm good.
Maybe it's not the low gravity gymnasium, but it is the gym.
There you go. So what's happening next time, Scholar Beta?
We've got 2 more episodes to dig into this season. We have Conspiracy, and then the season finale, the unforgettable Neutral Zone. Very forgettable. In fact, nothing really happens in that episode, but we'll get to that next week. Or actually, you say maybe some things happen. I don't know. We'll find out. I can't really remember. I just remember a lot of talking between 2 people on bridges, you know? So, and then we're thinking about also a special season 1 retrospective. The best of season 1, the worst of season 1. We've talked about what works and what doesn't work with these episodes, but now we can think about it kind of on a bigger season scale too. So I'll just close by saying thank you to Memory Alpha. Everything you do in there for me, name checking, confirmation. I wrote down the name of the planets in my notes, and then I always go to you to make sure I got them right or to see how far off I am. And I really am, that's a laugh right there. TrekWork, as always, your scripts, your caps, they're invaluable. I love them. Thank you so much for having those. And all of our listeners, especially Mr. Picard, who submitted your TrekWork, and the special commendation was definitely deserved there. So keep that coming, my friends. Tweet at us. Put it in the comments. We'll definitely give you some love for that. Anything you need to say, my friend, before we take off?
Mahalo nui loa to all our listeners. Lost Treks, the public history YouTube video series I talked about last week, is gaining momentum. I'm going to be recording the first episode or 2 in the next couple weeks, and looking forward to seeing your perspective on that. Other than that, live long and prosper, and e malama pono, folks. You all take care. Please be safe, and we'll see you all next time.
Peace and long life, everyone. Have a good one.
Greetings, everyone. Captain Kanaka here. On behalf of all the educators at Teachers Talking Trek, I hope you enjoyed our little video here. As always, please let us know what you think in the comments. So with that said, live long and prosper, e malama pono, and see you next time.